So we have an update on the killing of George Floyd and what the authorities are saying now. This is from the medical examiner, and I regret to inform you that it looks like the fix is in. So you can see here, this is a screen capture from CNN. The medical examiner said the following, quote, "The autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death." So that's what we call a slap in the face. And this is a situation where they say, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? I can guarantee you one thing. If you take away one part of that recipe, George Floyd is still alive. And of course, the part I'm talking about is the knee on the neck for 9 minutes. Apparently, the officer kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for minutes after George Floyd was already dead. So I don't want to hear anything about the underlying health conditions, coronary artery disease, hypertensive heart disease. Even if that's true, that is not what led to the death even a little bit. Methinks if you put anybody under the knee of a police officer for 9 minutes, I think I would die. I think you would die. I think the overwhelming majority of people would die. Maybe with the exception of some professional bodybuilders who have so much muscle around their neck that they could somehow not get, strangled in that way. So this is, and just so everybody understands, because this is a very important story, what this shows you is they're in cahoots. They're in cahoots. So the medical examiner is in cahoots with the cops. The prosecutor is in cahoots with the cops. Now, there is good news on that front because we have Keith Ellison has now been appointed for the case. And that is that you can breathe a sigh of relief because now we know for sure at least they will attempt to get justice. Whereas previously, I was concerned that it was definitely going to be a show trial, okay? But when you look at what the medical examiner is saying here, this is absolutely a slap in the face. And even if you're naive enough and gullible enough to buy the thing about, oh, maybe it was the underlying health conditions that really contributed to his death. Okay, but look at that last line because they give away the game there. They're too blunt with it. They're too straightforward with it. They don't take the rough edges off of their propaganda. And I'll read it to you one more time here. They say, his underlying health conditions and any possible or potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death. Potential intoxicants. Potential intoxicants. Hey, there's absolutely zero evidence at all that he was on drugs, but if we throw in a line about maybe he's on drugs, then maybe that'll help our case because, and the case they're trying to build is like, unhealthy, thug, gangster. So, what did you expect? Is it really? I think it's more his fault that he's dead. Oh, Jesus. We've seen this playbook time and time again. I mean, when it came to Eric Garner, I Can't Breathe, the original. There was an illegal chokehold used against him, and all he was doing was like selling loose cigarettes or something like that. And he kept screaming, "I can't breathe," and he wound up dead. And I have to tell you guys again, the only time I've seen justice in cases that are similar, police brutality cases, is the Walter Scott case. And in the Walter Scott case, he literally had to turn around, run away, and dude was like 10 or 20 feet away, maybe even as far as 25 feet away, running away back to the officer. The cop pulls out his gun, casually, slowly aims, fires, and murders him. And that's the only case I can remember where, and it was the most egregious, where there was actually justice and the cop was found guilty and is now in prison. You know, in the Eric Garner case, if I remember correctly, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I think he got off. And again, there was a lot of evidence, a lot of bits and pieces that they were rigging it from day one. They were doing everything they possibly could in order to make sure that this guy got off and saw no consequences. And then now, again, we're seeing the medical examiner is already setting the table and kind of letting everybody know, like, hey, if nothing gets done here, and if there's no justice, and I mean, what do you want us to do? It's not the asphyxia or the strangulation. Maybe it had a lot to do with the coronary artery disease and the hypertensive heart disease and the potential intoxicants. So we've seen this play out 1,000 times. Expect stories coming out in the future of like, hey, here's George Floyd's previous criminal record. You know, in 1997, he stole a candy bar, and now we're going to talk about that and try to make people believe, like, oh, maybe he had it coming, bro. But people aren't buying it, man. They're not buying it. Again, you're asking us to believe you over our lying eyes, and our eyes ain't lying. We saw what we saw. We saw a knee on a neck for 9 minutes, and we saw somebody begging because they can't breathe, and justice has to be served. And then, you know, like I try to mention in every single segment. In fact, I'll pull it up right now as I talk to you guys. But like I try to mention in every segment involving police brutality, I think we need to implement all of the reforms that Campaign Zero is proposing. So, you know, it's easy, and we'll get to discussions on the protests in a little bit because there's a lot to say about what's going on, but it's easy for everybody to kind of get very angry, go out in the streets, and get wild, and just like let off steam in a way. But the only way we ever get positive change to prevent this stuff from happening in the future is if we're organized, there's a strategy, and there are clear goals that we're fighting for. So when it comes to police brutality, I mean, the roadmap is laid out. You got to end the war on drugs. That's a duh kind of thing at this point, because in so many of these cases, that is the thing that almost allows the police to be more involved in people's lives than they should be, and to be more authoritarian and disruptive than they should be. If we just didn't have a war on drugs, and it wasn't a criminal penalty to have drugs, use drugs, sell drugs, then you wouldn't see the police brutality. Now, and if people think, oh my God, that's so extreme, we've had alcohol legal in this country since the end of Prohibition. Okay? And alcohol, yes, it does lead to many social ills, but people would rather have the freedom to choose than be over-policed with an authoritarian state micromanaging your private life. And people seem to understand that and get that when it comes to alcohol. When it comes to other drugs, all of a sudden it's, you know, pump the brakes, what are you talking about? And it's ridiculous. You should be consistent with your standard across the board here and let people choose what to put in their body. But beyond that, you got to end broken windows policing. So now this is from the Campaign Zero site. You want community oversight boards for the police to make sure like they can keep them in check. They can review. You want to limit the use of force. So you want to have very clear-cut rules that are enforced about what's allowed and what's not allowed. You want to have independent investigations and an independent prosecutor. Again, in this case, thankfully, the police have been arrested, or the one with the knee on the neck has been arrested. The other three have not. We'll see if that changes soon. And been charged with, I believe, third-degree murder. And Keith Ellison is now taking over the case, so that is a positive development. You want community representation in the police departments because it's much less likely that people, you know, resort to violence when it's somebody who came from the community, and so everybody kind of knows everybody to one extent or another, so you're more likely to be lenient and only really try to, you know, police when it's absolutely vital and necessary. Body cameras need to be mandatory. There need to be strict rules about they can never be turned off. The training needs to be done to emphasize de-escalation. We'll get to a story later because a lot of people will think like, oh my God, that's not possible. Like, we're so used to this, you know, the situation that we have now where there's so many instances of police brutality, but I'm going to show you what happens in other countries and it's going to blow your mind. We need to end for-profit policing, another no-brainer. We need to demilitarize the cops. You know, there's been a really incredible move in this country towards making the military a standing army. I mean, they literally get access to weapons of war. And that should not be allowed. Those are different things. the military and the police, those should be two totally different mindsets. And just for the record, that's not to say that it's okay to be like extra violent overseas. Of course, I think we're way too militaristic and we need to cut the military budget on that front, and we need to end all these wars and all that stuff. But still, you cannot have a militarized police force. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, is the old saying, and that's so true. So these guys are just waiting to use force because they have that option. And then, of course, we want to have fair police union contracts that do not protect cops at all costs, especially when they do things that are wildly egregious and criminal in their own respect. So I think that, these are very clear policy goals that just absolutely would change the nature of policing in this country. And, I'll do my best to keep my eye on the developments in the case, but right now we're definitely getting mixed vibes, because on the one hand, you did have them get arrested, or you at least had the worst offender get arrested. You have him charged, and Keith Ellison is now in control of the case. Those are positive things. But, on the other hand, this quote from the medical examiner is really terrifying, because it shows that there are some things going on behind the scenes and strings being pulled, and they're going to try to do everything they possibly can to wiggle their way out of accountability and wiggle their way out of justice. And I think that has a lot to do with why people are in the streets right now, because they're fed up. And honestly, I think that what we're seeing in terms of what's going on in every major city around the country right now, I think it goes beyond this too. Yes, this was the spark that got everybody out there in the streets. But make no mistake about it, people are hurting. People are in pain. And a lot of that does have to do with police brutality, but we also live in a failed state now. We also live in an oligarchy that just did the largest transfer of wealth upwards maybe in U.S. history, as people got crumbs during a pandemic and they can't pay the damn bills. So there's a lot going on right now that's contributing to this. But this quote from the medical examiner is not good. And you'll know pretty clearly who the good guys are and the bad guys are moving forward, because the bad guys will reveal themselves with time.